Hi everyone, welcome to Jawaras. In this video, we are going to talk about bean scopes. So scopes control the number of instances to be created for a particular bean. For example, we can define a bean using this syntax bean and optional ID and then the class name for which we want to create a bean or instance of the class, and then we can specify scope. So let's see how many scopes are there and what we can accomplish using them. So these are the available scopes. Singleton, which is a default scope. So if you don't specify any scope, Singleton will be used. There is prototype scope, then request, session, application, and WebSocket. So these four scopes are only available in Spring Web. So we won't talk about them in this video. And you can also create custom scopes and use them. So we will talk about custom scopes. Now let's talk about Singleton scope. So this is a default scope, and if you use singleton scope for any bean definition, then a single object instance is created for a single bean and single IOC container for that particular class. Let's see that in action. I have already created a project. So in the pom.xml file, I have specified Java version 17 and Spring version 6.0.11. I have added dependency for Spring context, which is responsible for Spring IOC container. Then I have main.java class inside main package, author service class inside service package, and then we have this beans.xml file where we will define all the beans and configuration. So for now, I have defined a bean here for class author service. And if you don't specify any scope, it will be singleton. So if you define scope equal to singleton, and it will say attribute scope with default value singleton is superfluous. So you can remove scope attribute because the default is singleton. I will just remove it. Now let's say inside main, let's try to access the author service bean here. First of all, let's create application context. Application context will be new class path XML application context, since we have defined the beans configuration in a XML file. Now let's get author service. So where service will be context dot get bean author service dot class. Let's say service 2 will be context dot get bean author service dot class. Let's print out these service 2 and run it. We can see both the service and service 2 points to the same instance of the class. So that means there will be only singleton instance of the class. Now let's do one thing. So here let's create another bean with the same class author service, and let's give it different name. We can say test service. Now if we run it again, we will get exception, no unique bean definition exception, because expected a single matching bean but found two. So we are trying to get a bean of type author service from the context, but there are two beans of type author service. And in that case, Spring ISA container won't try to guess which bean we need. It will just throw an exception. What we can do is we can give it a name. So let's give it a name. Let's give it name as well. Service. So for service, I will just say service, and this is the type. For another bean, I will say as service and author service dot class as type. Let's run it again. Now we can see we have two different instances of the class. That means there will be one instance for each bean definition. So that's why I highlighted single bean here. So if you have multiple bean definitions, then there will be multiple instances of that class. So singleton scope is not same as singleton instance of a class, but it is same as singleton instance for each bean definition and each Spring IOC container. What do I mean by that is you can create multiple Spring containers. So let's copy it. Let's say I will create another context here, and this service 3, service 4, and I will get these beans from context 2. So we are creating another application context from the same bean definition file, and we are accessing the author service. And now if we run it, now we can see we got 4 different instances of author service class. That is because there will be one instance per bean definition per Spring IOC container. In this case, we have two is two context, two application context or Spring IOC containers, and in each container we have two bean definitions. So we will have total 4 instances of author service. So that was it about singleton scope. Now the next scope is prototype scope. So this can create any number of object instances for a bean or for a class. Whenever you try to access a bean of particular type, you will get a new instance every time. So let's do that. So for example, I will just remove this. We will only look at one, and let's remove this as well. So let's say we have only one bean definition, but the scope is prototype. Now we will try to get access the bean of type author service. This time we don't need to specify the name because there is only one bean definition. And if we run it, so we get 2 different instances here. So, but we are getting the same bean twice, and we are getting 2 different instances. So that means if we try to get, let's say, if we try to access this bean of same times at 10 different places, we will get 10 different instances. So that is what prototype scope do. So as I have already mentioned, we won't talk about request scope, session scope, application scope, and WebSocket scope. Now we will directly look at how to create custom scope and how to use them. So this is how we create a custom scope. To create a custom scope, we need to implement an interface which is called scope and which is from org.springframework.beans.factory.config package. So you can look, or you can see more about it in the Spring Java doc. So if we search for scope, not this scope, this one is org.springframework.beans.factory.config.scope. So you can see strategy interface used by configurable bean factory representing a target scope to hold bean instances in. So it has some methods which are useful to access and create beans. So let's create a custom scope using this interface. So I have a package called scopes. Inside it, I will create a Java class. So what do I want this? I want to create a scope which will create one instance of a class for each thread. So that means if let's say we have 2 threads running, then there will be 2 instances, one for each thread. Let's create simple add scope, and this will implement scope, and this scope will be from org.springframework.beans.factory. Now we need to implement few methods. Let's implement them. So the only method which we need to implement, which is compulsory to implement, is this get method. All other methods are optional. But if you implement the get method, you should implement remove method as well. So I won't talk about the remaining methods. You can read about them in this here in this Java doc. So let's talk about get method. So get method takes two things. One is name, second is object factory. Object factory is responsible for creating object. So you can get or you can create a new object using object factory. And name is name of the bean. So here you need to decide whether uh, you need to return already created instance of the class, or you need to create a new instance using object factory, and then you can store the instance anywhere, and on the next run of this method you can return that instance. So it's all up to you. So here the name will be name of the bean. So like here, we specify id or name, so this will be the name. And you need to return an instance of the class. Then second is remove. So remove method, what it does is it will remove the instance of that class from, you know, wherever you are storing those beans. So for that we have remove method. So let's do that. So what I want is I want to have a map. So I will have a map of string and object. Let's say beans, where this string represents the name of bean and object represents the instance of bean. But I want to have this method, this map. So I want one map for each thread. That means we need a thread local map. So how to create thread local map? So we can see here thread local map, or let's just see here. Okay, we can create a thread local map using this private static final. But we don't want it to be static. We want it to be instance variable. So private final thread local, and it will be map of string and object. And we can give it any name. So let's say um, map map thread local, and thread local dot with initial, thread local dot with initial, and I guess it will give us the value of initial, and it needs to return the map. So we can just return new as map, and we can replace this with method reference. Okay, so we have created a map thread local. So this will basically be instance of thread local. So whenever we access it will give us a map of type is string object. Let's do that. In the get method, first of all, so keep in mind that this there will be one map for each thread. So we don't need to use synchronize or anything for any method, because the thread will use only map related to that thread. So now first of all let's print out the name of the bean. So we can say bean name will be name. Okay, and now let's access the map. So map string object beans will be map thread local dot get. When we call get method, so it will call this method here, and it will return a new hash map initially, but after that we will update the map. So that's it. Now let's see if beans dot, okay, let's say object obj will be beans dot get name, and if obj is null, that means if there is no instance for the bean with the given name, then we need to create what we can see says beans dot, or let's say obj equal to object factory dot get object, and then we will put this object into the map. So beans dot put key will name will be the key and obj will be the value, and after that we will just return the obj. And let's implement the remove method. So we want to remove the object from the this map. So what we can say is and we need to return the same object back. So let's say object obj will be first we need to access the beans. So map thing object beans will be add local dot get, obj will be beans dot get, the key will be name. So here also name is the bean name, and after that we just remove this object from the map. So beans dot remove key is name, and then we return the object. And I won't implement the rest of the methods, so you can look at the Spring Java doc here, and then you can understand them. So now we have created a simple thread scope. Okay. Let's see how do we register it. So to register it, we need to create a bean of type custom scope configurer, and then we need to set a property type scopes, which is a map, and this map key is name of the scope. So for example, we have seen two scope prototype and singleton. So this is that is the name, and the implementation of that scope is will be the value of this entry, and we can specify that using bean. So let's do that. So in the beans.xml, here what I will do is I will create a bean of type org dot string framework dot beans dot factory dot config dot config dot custom scope configurer. So if you create a new custom scope, you use custom scope configurer, and let's say property name equal to scope. This will be a map. So let's say entry key will be the what do you want to give this scope a name. So let's say we want to give it scope head, and this the value will be a bean of bean, and the class will be the this class of this custom scope. So bean class will be scopes dot simple thread scope. So that is now we can use scope thread as a scope. So let's use here. So I will say scope equal to, you can see this is available for auto completion as well, scope thread. Now let's run it. Okay, so you can see bean name is service dot author service, because since we have not given any name here, so the name will be the fully qualified name of the class, which is package name dot class name, and hashtag 0 because this is the first bean definition, probably that's why. Now let's see what if we give it a id. So let's say id service. If I run it, now the name is this service, since we have overridden the name. So now if we say name as well, let's say author service. Now if we run it, so now as well the name is service. So if you have both id and name, then the ID will override everything. But if you don't have ID here, let's say only this one, you run it, the name is author service. If you have multiple names, so let's say author service 2, then the name is author service only. Okay, so that's it. That is the name. Now you can see both instances are same because this is single thread only. Now let's create another thread. So thread t thread equal to thread, and what do we want to do in this thread is where service 3 will be context.getBean author service dot class, and let's print service 3, and I will say thread dot start. Okay, now let's rerun it. Now you can see these two instances are same, but this third instance, which is from this thread service 3, it is different from these two. That means we are able to create one instance per thread. That's how we create custom scope. And how to use custom scope, we have already seen. As we use the standard scopes, we use custom scope the same way. There is no difference. Thank you everyone for watching the video. I will meet you in the next video. Until then, keep learning. Bye.